joined now here on Trailblaze by Kelley Robinson of the Human Rights Campaign. She is in charge, folks. She is in charge of all of this. First Black woman. I think that's a wonderful thing to show and represent about a variety of different identities being represented in the work for equality. Kelley, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, I'm happy to be here, y'all.
Hi, Kelley. Welcome.
Hey.
We got to get a clap. We got to get one of those clap sound things for the soundboard when people come on so we can get everybody's excited. But we are excited to have you. Thank you, Kelley, for being here. We appreciate you taking some time out.
Yeah, and 7 days to this election. I can't imagine a better place to be.
I know. So, before we get started, I do want to ask you, because I think it is a big deal that you're here. You're, as Nayyera just said, you're the first Black queer woman to make it to the executive director job at Planned Parenthood. How did that happen?
Rewind. Redo that.
I'm sorry. Well, you were at Planned Parenthood before. No, so I'm just kind of jumping ahead. You were at Planned Parenthood Action Fund before, and now you are at the Human Rights Campaign. So I am curious to know, how did this progression happen? How did you get here?
Yeah, and both facts are right. I was the first Black woman to be executive director of Planned Parenthood Action Fund, too. And I was happy to serve under Alexis McGill Johnson's leadership, who is the second Black president of that organization. But for me, I came to the Human Rights Campaign in 2022, and I had been at Planned Parenthood for 13 years. I mean, I have one tattoo on my body, and it's a Planned Parenthood tattoo. I was like, this is my place. This is my movement. I know it is. But when Roe v. Wade was overturned, and Clarence Thomas said the quiet part out loud, the next he encouraged the court to come for Obergefell and Lawrence and Windsor, cases that fundamentally established LGBTQ plus rights in this country, I knew I had to do something. I mean, my wife and I had just gotten married the year before. I had just had my son my first son earlier that year. It became clear that we had to fight for our rights in a way that I honestly had taken for granted. So being here at the Human Rights Campaign, especially at this moment, has been so profound because I feel like we're in the middle of two things. One, an intense backlash on the progress that this movement has made over the last 20 years. And two, also this historic opportunity in front of us, right, where 30% of Generation Z identify as a member of the LGBTQ plus community. I've heard stories of people coming out between the ages of 3 and 103. We are at such a transformative moment where the future that our opposition is afraid of is actually already here. We are a more diverse nation, a more LGBTQ plus nation than ever before. And the question is, how do you translate that representation into political power and ultimately policies that validate all of our lives and humanity?
Wow. There is such a strong connection between what you're talking about in terms of backlash and just how hard the work can be. And I think people are feeling that in this election cycle, where all of these gains that have been made from the 60s and 70s, and even more recently with gay rights and gay marriage, it feels like everything's been clawed back. You have been a lifelong social justice activist and leader. How do you keep going in these moments that feel so dark?
Yeah. Well, my life isn't that long. I'm only 38 now. So
she's younger than JD Vance, folks. She can be around just as long as JD Vance. That is the answer right there.
Black don't crack. Good. You could be 25. You could be 52. We don't know.
Exactly. You don't know.
It's hard to know.
I mean, I cosplay as a Gen Alpha, but I'm millennial.
But I think part of it is we got to take a note from our ancestors that the fight for freedom is a long fight. Credit Scott King's words that freedom is never won or lost. It's fought for and earned in every generation. So we got to understand that that's our task right now. And for me, I still come back to the point that I'm a Black queer woman in America. If you've got a time machine, I am not getting in it. Things aren't perfect right now. There's a lot of progress we still have to make. I want to be clear about that. But there was never a time before now that was better to be Black and queer in America. So I just think that, if you put it in context, especially the last, kind of 50 years of the struggle for freedom, I think that we've accomplished an incredible amount just in my lifetime, in the last generation. I mean, it wasn't until the 70s where women could get their own credit cards and get their own lines of credit, right? It wasn't until 2014 where marriage equality actually became the law of the land through the Obergefell decision. It was the 70s, again, where abortion, we actually got the right to abortion in this country. So And the Civil Rights Act, right? That's 1965, 68, depending on how you want to look at it. But those things have happened in one generation. So I think that what we're seeing, again, is not that I don't feel like it's a total rolling back. I feel like it's a backlash to the progress that we've made. And now the chance is to really fortify that progress into sustainable change that can last for generations to come. You know, one of my colleagues, David Johns, he runs an organization called the National Black Justice Coalition. He always says our opposition, we talk about failing forward sometimes. When they fall down, they fall onto trampolines and just bounce, higher than they were before. Yep. I think the question here is, as we're experiencing.
Where's my trampoline? That's the question.
Exactly. Where's the trampoline? How do we use this as a moment to actually see the crisis that we're in as an opportunity to leap ahead and kind of reevaluate the things that we had thought could never change, right? Things like the courts, right? We're always going to be that way. The Electoral College is always going to be this way. Before Roe v. Wade was overturned, we would say, knowing that it didn't serve all women, it was a right in name only, especially for women in the South, we would say, well, that's the best we can do. No, it's not. Right now, we can develop a democracy that is truly by and for all people, knowing that there are some ways that we've got to create it to be more inclusive moving forward. But that door is open for us now.
So, one way I think about, so I used to work at this company called the Raven Group, and our office used to be in the same building with the Human Rights Campaign. So I got to know a bunch of the people who were there, and I've known some others in previous parts of my life. And so, but I will say, for a long time, even like HRC and some of the LGBTQ movements felt incredibly white, right? And it felt like, we think about Stonewall, we think about the images that, I've spent a lot of time with friends in San Francisco. We think about the images of like of how we think about the movement, and it seemed incredibly white, incredibly male. And so I think about you being at the leadership in this movement, and I'm curious to know, one, how have people reacting to that? But two, how does that impact working in terms of inclusivity inside of a movement that's also dedicated to inclusivity?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's part of the story of progress. One of the things I've really been intentional about, though, is retelling the story of the past, right? Because oftentimes we're talking about Stonewall, but not talking about Marsha P. Johnson, a Black trans woman, Sylvia Rivera, a Latina trans woman, and them actually being at the forefront of that. Or we talk about the civil rights movement, and before, Rustin came out, thank you, Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, for producing that. But before that came out, we weren't talking about Bayard Rustin, a Black gay man, as being a central point of the March on Washington. So one of the things I want to do is retell our stories, because Black, queer people of color, trans people, trans folks of color have always been in this movement and in this fight. And I want to make sure that we're honoring and respecting that story. And two, I think that we also have to be open to receiving the criticism and the feedback. I think a lot of folks receive the marriage movement as not one that was really inclusive to all folks, and thinking about, one, what are we doing after marriage to keep the ball rolling towards equality and freedom? And two, who are the people that don't see themselves as a part of the story, and how do we bring them in? And I think this is a time where we're rewriting that. I mean, a lot of our work is really focused on, kind of this principle of organizing, that the people that are closest to the problems are also the people that are closest to the solutions. And if we prioritize and center, Black trans women, especially trans folks of color, in this fight, it's going to benefit the movement as a whole. So I'm excited about that charge. I feel like it's one that I've accepted since day one. And, as we've moved forward, the movement's embraced it for the most part. I mean, we have movement challenges that we have to kind of work through. But people understand, especially right now, that there's no world in which only some of us get free. It's all of us or none of us.
So that leads to my next question for you, Kelley, which is this idea of the culture wars that has become so potent this election cycle. I'm not convinced it's actually translating into voting, but it certainly riles up the masses. And you take this idea that my son went to school, a boy, and I picked up a girl. This is a problem with our public school system. I mean, the logic defies me, but there's clearly something there. Is it a fear? Is it how have you wrestled with what's happening in local communities, knowing that it now, with the Trump campaign, has been blown up nationally?
It is so outrageous, the lies that they are just saying, the bold-faced lies that they are saying on TV, in ads, in their speeches all across the country. And for me, I can see it clearly, right? Like, these are people that are peddling in hate and transphobia because they do not have a plan to offer people on what they can actually deliver to make their lives better. So 2 things. One, we know that the ads don't work. There's new kind of polling that came out from Data for Progress either last week or the week before. It even found that 85% of Republicans think that these ads are mean-spirited, right? And that Republicans should back away from them. That's more than the percentage of Democrats and independents that felt the same way, though they were at similarly high numbers. And if you look at the last few election cycles, 2023, for example, they ran millions of dollars of anti-trans ads to try to defeat Andy Beshear in his governor's race in Kentucky. But guess who's sitting in the governor's mansion now, right? They ran millions of dollars of these ads to try to undermine the abortion rights ballot amendment in Ohio. But still today, abortion rights is enshrined in that state's constitution. We see it lose time and time again. The sad part about it, though, I think one is that it contributes to misinformation, disinformation about a community that people just don't know a lot about yet, right? Right now, a lot of people don't believe or don't know that they know a trans or non-binary person. So they are using these ads to feed the worst parts of our humanity that sometimes when we're unfamiliar with something, we lead with fear instead of curiosity. And when I think about all the kids in this country, the young trans and non-binary kids, they are the ones that are suffering because this is giving a permission structure to adults to keep picking on children. That to me is the most horrific part of these ads. And I think where our communities, and particularly our kids, need us to be rallying around them most.
That idea of
tough is,
adults picking on kids. Yeah,
adults picking on kids, because I think then what happens is the kids learn bad habits too, right? And so we have this moment where we have this incredible inclusivity. The kids seem like they're kind of making progress that the adults aren't making. But if all the adults around them are giving them these values, that are bad, and giving them like a model of how to engage people, where even if you don't understand or don't know it, there's a way to talk to people. There's a way to ask a question. Right. There's a way to give people space to let them express themselves, even if you don't know it or quote unquote agree with it, like it's something for you to agree with. But even if it's something that troubles you or you don't get it, give them the space to be themselves. Why is it any of my business what you do? Right?
Exactly.
Like, why is that a question?
Exactly.
That's so much of the journey of wanting to give your children space to figure out who they are, who they want to be, make them feel safe in doing that a lot of children don't, right, feel safe in this moment. A lot of adults don't feel safe. I do want to bring in, because you had mentioned in previous conversations, faith, right, and how that's informed you. Certainly informed a lot of my work in engagement, public engagement, and community work. And I would like to mention that it is actually not consistent across religions to be anti-trans. I will say that the country of Pakistan, with all of its other challenges, actually has a passport option of X, which is a third gender. And the recognition throughout South Asian culture of feminine spirits and male bodies and all of that's, like, it is not, the gender binary is very, very much a Victorian British colonial type export. Again, so many other challenges and social issues that you can have in South Asia and the Middle East, but that's actually not one of them. And I think it's surprising to people in America when they hear there are other ways that you can be in this world than what we know here in this, white Christian context.
You better preach. I'm telling you. And even in Catholicism, right? The Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. The Holy Ghost didn't have a gender,
Right.
But again, like, there is nothing, the thing that I feel like a lot of religions have in common is the idea that we honor the humanity of people that are around us, right? And that's the thing that's missing here. And every time I see these attacks that are done in the name of God, it undermines everything that I grew up and learned about. It undermines everything that I know about the institution. This isn't something that we're talking about leading from a space of hate in. Especially when you have a man that's leading the Republican Party, an extremist called Donald Trump, who holds a Bible upside down as he throws tear gas at American citizens. Like, it is beyond me. And I think that one of the things that you also see the movement doing is reclaiming two things I think are important. One, a reclaiming of faith, right? regardless of your religiosity, I think this concept of faith, of belief in something beyond yourself, is a principle and idea that a lot of people are bringing back into our movement. And two, the reclaiming of patriotism, right? That this is our country as much as it is anybody else's, and no extremist is going to try to take that away from us. And I think what I saw during the Democratic National Convention, what I've seen through Kamala Harris's campaign and Tim Walz's campaign, the way that they are creating the space to reclaim those two concepts, I think that that's powerful and going to have a long ability to bring more people in and kind of build the broad tent of the coalition.
We're not going back. We're not going back.
I was just laughing at Trump not only held the Bible upside down, but he didn't even have a Bible verse. When they tried to ask him what his favorite, is he a New Testament or Old Testament guy? I like all the Testaments.
All of them, yeah.
I like all the Testaments.
Do we think I know more Bible than he does?
I'm sure you do. I'm not even like a little bit doubtful that you do.
I mean, like, he's clearly not a Matthew. He's like more Leviticus. Like, is that
right? Exactly. But it's amazing to me that people tend to bring God up in their like fealty to God. They're doing God's will. It seems the only will they come up when they're oppressing other people. It seems the only will they come up when they're denying other people's rights. Right? Like whenever someone wants to come out and say, you can't participate because God told me, right? It's not like those of us, well, it is actually true. Like in many of our communities, when people talk about God, we talk about like, this idea of taking care of our neighbor and, and reaching out and bringing people in and feeding the hungry and clothing the naked and whatever. But there are a lot of people who only seem to bring God up when they want to tell everybody no.
Well, it turns into the right, God is my tribe. One singular tribe, right? And then you're either in or you're out, but based on these behaviors. And
well, then the question becomes,
that sense of belonging is important to people,
right? Like we start parsing. My dad likes to do this. He's a AME minister, and he always like people always
you're PK.
I am. Well, it's late. Like he didn't become a minister until I was like 17, so I was not really.
Are you the reason why he became a minister? Were you
probably in part? We had 5 boys, and so I think we drove him into the arms of the Lord. But you say like, oh, we want prayer in schools. Like, well, what prayer? Like, okay, only Christian prayer. Okay, well, Protestant or Catholic? Oh, Protestant. Okay, Baptist, Methodist, or whatever. Okay, only Methodist. Okay, well, AME or whatever. Like, so you start like defining these things down. Now you've left everybody out of the equation, right? Like 90% of the people are now in the equation because people have divided up. We all have different things that we believe. And so part of why we are in this country, supposedly, part of what the country is supposed to be based on is the idea that we could all be who we are. And it doesn't actually come into the public square. And we let our faiths be part of our private existence while we all give each other the space to govern without having that dominate.
Yeah. I love what you were saying before about this deep need to find belonging. I think especially something happened to us in the course of the pandemic with the isolation that people experience in different ways. When we emerged, people were just looking for a place to belong. And Hari Hahn has this kind of, she's a researcher out of Johns Hopkins. She kind of studies social movements. She has this interesting theory or research that she's put together around some of the extremists that you see and how a lot of that extremist belief set comes first from that need to belong, right? Like people kind of going to the Proud Boys or, whatever these extremist kind of congregations are because they're looking for belonging. And then the belief comes afterwards. And I think that, for progressives, I think that that's a big thing that we're trying to reestablish now, that you can belong. We can have different identities, different ideas, but we can have a shared sense of belonging. And that's why I think some of this work that they're doing to reclaim the ideas of patriotism of like USA, I think it creates an important container for the belonging that it can then reestablish that our belief set doesn't have to be one of division. It can actually be one of unity.
Thank you so much for that, Kelley. You belong here. Everybody belongs here on the Trailblaze podcast, because this is where we try to figure out who we are, what we're becoming, where we're going to go as a country. And I'm so glad that we had you join us just a few days before the election, folks. Kelley Robinson, who is running the Human Rights Campaign. What is your final get out the vote message for folks?
We can win. We can do this. All we got to do is show up. And I know folks are feeling anxious in these last 7 days. Use that energy to go knock a door. I know that folks are feeling nervous right now. Use that energy to go make a phone call or make a vote plan. But we can do this. I think the number of people that see the humanity in one another is greater than the number that don't. It's our job to turn out the votes and get this thing done.
All right, from your lips to God's ear. Because we were talking about religion. Let's leave it there. Thank you so much, Kelley. It's an honor to be on with you.
Thank you.